they just, are trying to get some other benefits from the businesses. For example, social commitments from businesses to repair roads, to build schools or medical installations, but that's in my opinion is not right. The rules should be defined very clearly, and everybody should know before entering the business, should know what he is expected to do and what he can get from the business. So they do simple investment analysis and take decision whether risks are covered by expected returns. That's it. So I'm coming from the business, from industry, and I obviously understand that. And well, permission process is very, very important, because we saw that historically many licenses were provided to companies that didn't have experience, didn't have resources, but they were provided to those companies and were resold. Some were not resold. Some licenses were not developed over a longer period of time, and the country, lost on opportunities. Because I'm sure that we should design very clear rules, and if the licensee is not developing its reserves, they should be taking off. They should be pressed by the time to do this. So I think that the initiatives that we started in terms of royalty rates, that I hope will be approved. Just recently, we saw that several laws in the parliament already. Unfortunately, they were not voted, but I'm expecting this to happen shortly. The regulation, or there are many also initiatives. The law submitted by Ms. Belkova is already also in the parliament, so I'm sure there should be procedural changes. On the general macroeconomic situation should change, so that investors will to make Ukraine energy independent. Like I said, reserves conditions are well, I don't see why we are not able to do it. Just a small comment on the initiative. Information availability and quality of the information is highly important for all stakeholders. You see, depending on quality of information, that can change. Royalty rates can change and be more effective. Because without knowing what we spent in terms of gas by the consumers, we are not able to determine the entire value chain, and we are not able to determine the margins or profitability of the production level, the transportation, supply, storage. So each particular should be profitable for investors. To additional liquidity or provide additional competition in each particular sector, which definitely, after some time, should contribute to reasonable tariff. The problem with tariff is that many ultimate consumers are not trusting these tariffs are fair. The key problem of this is that on the market we have sources of information. Therefore, such as KPI visibility should help to determine the real situation in terms of production volumes, which is not obvious. If a minister starts talking about facts that we are not sure we have clear information on how industry producing gas, particularly of oil. There are many rumors that these figures that are reported are underestimated. So in order to know what we are working with, what the market is, we need to have this information. So initiatives are very important because not you have problems import or excise also excise taxes, VAT, and without on the other side we are able to determine what is the size of the consumption. Therefore, at least having such work done on production stage, on the extractive level, we will be able to get more visibility on every value chain, and I'm sure that with a reasonable approach we will be able to help industry to produce, to work efficiently, be motivated to invest money, and to come into Ukraine. Because we all see that a lot of investment is needed into every stage, especially into production, into generation of electricity as well, in all the stages. And on our side, from the ministry's side, very progressive law on the gas market that is already adopted, law on electricity market that it has been already prepared and has been already submitted to Cabinet of Ministers. I'm sure that this will be a next wave of bringing new competition into the sector, attracting new investors. Certainly, government is also planning to privatize some of the assets, particularly in electricity segment. I'm sure that these efforts will help to attract new people into the market and provide interest and reasonable return for these parties, allowing them to stay for long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Demchishin. Ladies and gentlemen, we heard Minister talking about Ukraine being a resource-rich country, and in order to sustainably manage energy sector, Ukraine will need to undertake policy and regulatory reforms. Minister spoke about need for deregulation, about some of the institutional changes, tax reforms. He spoke about necessity for transparency. So with this, just to jumpstart our panel discussion, I would like to ask Mr. Andy Hunter, in this current state, does Ukraine energy policy offer sufficient incentives and support for increasing private investments in the sector? And what could be the impact of the recent improvements in oil and gas policies, and specifically in the tax policies on upstream investments in Ukraine? So please, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. We at the American Chamber of Commerce, we represent 600 of the largest investors that are operating in Ukraine. About 30% are American, and the rest are the largest European and also Ukrainian companies. The biggest issues, starting from a generalist perspective, is the biggest obstacles that we see today are the corruption, the weak judicial system, and the bureaucracy. So these are issues that we are constantly addressing, and we feel that these are extremely the most important now to get a real sort of investor sentiment back and to get the investors to come here and also to understand those that are already operating here. As Mr. Fan said also, the next literally 2 weeks, the most important issue will be the adoption of a 2016 budget and the new tax code, which is extremely important. I think, as Mr. Fan said, there is a lot of populism out there at the moment. Our position is that we would like to see IMF program continuation is absolutely crucial, and it's very, very important that this is something that is focused on and that we get a budget for 2016. In terms of the energy, and more specific oil and gas, we have one of our very strong committee at the American Chamber of Commerce. And over the last year, we've prepared a white paper specifically on oil and gas reforms, which we are constantly reviewing and seeing, what has been done, what hasn't been done. We're very grateful to the Minister and all the Ministry for this dialogue. I think the dialogue we have now is truly very good. So this B2G dialogue that is very, very good. In terms of 2015, if we ask our members in the energy sector, we asked them, how has 2015 been? For some, it's been a frustrating year. It's been a bit of a frozen year with not much sort of really going on. I think in terms of, what we did see was the adoption of the, as the Minister mentioned, was the new gas market law, which we believe, will ensure involvement of a new model of a natural gas market. But it's important that the secondary legislation is adopted as soon as possible in order to guarantee the main principles proclaimed in the law that are realised. In terms of priorities, I think there are a number of priorities that we are looking at. The investors. What are they looking for? Looking for a clear, transparent, and consistent rule of game. The complexity and unpredictability of such rules do not contribute to better improvement of the investment climate. In terms of what the Minister also mentioned, the taxation. The stability of taxation is the ground principle for all investors, both those who already operate in the market as well as prospective investment. The current royalties rates, as well as instability of taxation, neglect all the positive reforms for the sector and is a heavy burden on independent producers. As the Minister mentioned, the law has not been adopted on the royalties, and I think it's very much, this is one of the key issues that we're seeing and we have been seeing in terms of 2015, but there's hope for 2016 this will be one of the biggest changes that we'll see. The other basic priorities are reforming land legislation for the needs of the oil and gas sector, adoption of new rules for oil and gas fields development, and of course guarantee of non-monopolization of gas markets in Ukraine. In terms of other what can increase the attractiveness for Ukraine in international and oil and gas investors is the creation of familiar environments of transparency and competitiveness. The main achievement within this sector is connected with the implementation of the EITI standard, as was mentioned. At the same time, there is a list of key priorities which will make the work of investors in Ukraine much easier and will contribute to the attractiveness for further investments. Among these priorities, adoption of a new subsoil code, cancellation of special import quotas for pipe products used for drilling, further liberalisation of land access legislation, the possibility to purchase agricultural land for purposes of oil and gas production. And I think a lot of the issues still are related very much to improve the general investment climate, and which will influence the country risk assessment, a factor that incorporates the elements of impacting the transparency and stability and economic and illegal conditions. And here, just to name a few of the issues in terms of what the investors are very much looking for. I start a list is a liberalization of foreign currency exchange rules, adoption of IFRS accounting principles, acceptability to operate a loss for private companies during geological exploration stage, the normalization of oil and gas well tax treatment, acceptability of tax consolidation among Ukrainian incorporated affiliates, the creation of use capacities and services of affiliated companies, to buy the services without profit elements, deductibility of consulting and engineering services, and cancellation of any obstacles in payment for services from abroad, and even things like the simplification of employment procedure for non-Ukrainian citizens. In terms, if we look at all the sectors, I mean, the key sectors obviously in Ukraine are the agriculture, the IT, but also the energy. And we think the energy, especially the oil and gas sector, is one of the most important ones, especially for the energy sector. The investors are looking for improvements of current conditions. Some important steps were done by the government, and we see that the government institutions show openness and readiness to cooperate in business, and this is genuine. I think, the access that we've seen both with the ministry and with the government at a level throughout the government, the RADA, as the minister mentioned, MPs like Olga Bilkova and others in the Energy Committee, even the presidential administration. But on the other hand, the investors are looking to speed up this process to reforms and to actively and consistently communicate the changes and outcomes both to the business already investing in Ukraine and to the international community, which could invest in Ukraine tomorrow. So I think it is the good stuff that has been done, because the bad news we hear very quickly, but a lot of it is also getting this good news out and communicating this.
Andy, thank you very much. As you are the president of American Chamber of Commerce and represent a number of major private companies, it is very important to hear from you the priority list of the necessary legal changes. It was also very important to hear from you the urgency of addressing the critical issues. There is no time for delay. These reforms are very urgent. I also noted you mentioning that private investors are looking at three critical things. This is corruption, or actually addressing corruption issues, improving judicial system, and also the bureaucracy, removing the red tape and the regulation. So, but it was very encouraging also to hear from you that that you see the dialogue and exchange between the private sector and the public sector has improved. This is actually very critical. And with this, I would like to ask Mr. David Diamond to bring the perspective of EITI Secretariat. And David, how an EITI compliant status could help Ukraine and support a business climate improvement and increasing investments in the sector.
Thank you very much. Right, I think I have actually a formal PowerPoint presentation, so I think I will answer that question along the way, if I may. And
Do you prefer to come over?
I think I can stay here. Дорого дня, пані і панове. So I wanted to start out with a few words of Ukrainian, but I think I will stop there to keep you from any further pain in my mispronunciations of your language. Right, so I wanted to start out and provide a perspective on the investor perspective, or the investors that I represent. Now, I will say a few words about who those investors are, because I think that word is being used a lot today, and I represent a particular tranche of investors that are supporters of EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. The point of my presentation will be to explain how these investors are interested in good governance, interested in EITI, but in order to do that, I will discuss also the broader perspective of why sustainability issues are important for investors that I represent, and in particular the environmental, social, and the focus, of course, on the governance. So just a few words about the investors that I represent, and I represent the investors that support EITI, and there are 90 of these investors around the world that are official supporters of EITI. And these investors are, or the ones that I represent, are investors that manage other people's money. So we manage third-party assets. This means we are pension funds, we are asset managers, and we are investing in listed securities, that is, stocks and bonds of either companies or other entities, including sovereign bonds of governments. That's who we are. We are not our investment banks. We're not those doing the project financing. We're not the hedge funds. So I just want to make that clear, because I think we have different representatives here, or other members on this panel discussing who the investors and the interests for direct investment in the Ukraine. And I represent a group of investors that are indirectly interested in what's going on with the ITI, and in particular in your country and other ITI countries, but through the investments in listed securities. I think it's important to stress that. So moving on to the next slide, what I wanted to say about sustainability and why this is important for investors such as ourselves. I think it's key and this was noted by the minister, investors are interested in the risk profile and the ultimate profitability of an investment that they make, whether that's on the ground in country, or in our case, it's through the listed securities that we invest in. We're interested in anything that is going to have a material impact on the value of those investments, so those stocks and bonds. And what I'm going to focus on today, briefly, is in particular the sustainability issues, because of course investors have this financial focus, but they will be interested increasingly on environmental, social, and governance issues as and when they have an impact on the financial or economic profile of their investments. Of course, investors are interested in risks and opportunities, and have listed a number of the environmental, social, and governance issues that represent both risks and opportunities. And you can see there are a number of them there. There are things like climate change. I think most people in the room will be aware that there's a very important conference taking place in my home city, Paris, these past few days and this week, COP21, which is looking about how the world community can control or seek to control in climate change and limit climate change to +2 degrees Celsius by 2050. This will have knock-on impact for investors if and when there's regulation that seeks to limit CO2 emissions around the world. A couple of other issues there. Changing demographics. The UN says world population will double by 2050. This will mean increased needs to provide for food, infrastructure, housing, and of course energy for populations around these countries, around the world. Resource scarcity. I think we've heard from the minister that there is plenty of resources on the ground in the Ukraine. The question is how to access them, how to invest to produce, to get them into production. There are other fossil fuels which are by definition limited. These are finite resources. At some point they will run out. So the question is, how does one invest today and make the most use of these resources now in order to invest for the future? So these are the things investors are increasingly looking at. Research has proven that there is a correlation between considering these environmental and social and governance issues and the performance of the companies that do take care of these issues. And we'll begin to focus now on the governance question, because this is what, of course, interests us today, how governance practices for countries, for sovereign countries, but also for companies, can promote license to operate in country and promote direct investment. So moving on to the next slide, I just want to say a few words here, and this represents as a schema or a figure which represents what investors call the value chain of investment. And I will demonstrate or show how EITI fits into this value chain. In a nutshell, investors will be interested in what we call the upstream, before one invests, midstream in itself, and then downstream what takes place once you've made an investment over the medium and long term. Upstream investors want to see a regulatory and policy framework that is positive and promotes investment. Increasingly, investors, so I said, looking at these environmental, social, and governance issues, and so they will be involved in initiatives such as the ITI, which will promote better governance or the better taking on of these sustainability issues by the policy framework. I will speak about investment in a minute. Downstream simply means that, again, once one has made an investment, one as a shareholder, for example, when my company or the investors I represent own stocks of, say, oil and gas companies like Shell, BP, Total, they will vote at the annual general meetings of these companies, and they will have meetings with managements, with the CEO of these companies, and they will particularly be attuned to the issues of corporate governance and is the company well managed. Moving on to the next slide, I think getting into, I think something which will be of particular interest to your country. Investors are dependent on something called sovereign country ratings. The rating agencies provide these ratings and they help us make and drive our investments. Investors also have their own methodologies for evaluating the risk profile of countries. And here is a schema or an example of how one investor conducts this kind of work. I think it's important to show that what in this model, in terms of representing the ESG or sustainability issues, the question investors want to answer is how is when considering investing in a country, in that country's sovereign debt, for example, how is this country representing, or how is this country meeting the sustainability challenges ahead? So just what you have here is an aggregation or representation of all the ESG questions that an investor may ask him or herself, and then attach a particular rating, which then aggregates as a whole on issues like, as I said, energy consumption in the environmental space, water resources in the social space. It will be questions like education, investments in health, etc. Human rights is something investors will also be looking at increasingly. And then finally, governance. And again, here's the link to EITI, because what investors will be looking at, and I think things have been said already around the panel, we'll be looking at things like the control of corruption, so anti-bribery and corruption, how is that being reined in, the independence of the judicial system, the judicial framework, transparency, of course, overall. I think, again, use the opportunity to congratulate the EITI, the Ukrainian EITI community on publishing your first report. So that's an important first step in getting to transparency, which will lead then, hopefully, to better governance. And then ultimately, these things are aggregated, and as I said, they come and formulate or are represented as a rating, which helps investors in making their investment decision on whether to invest, for example, in the sovereign debt of a particular country. This is just an example. Again, there's no one recipe, one size fits all, but this is what one investor does. Looking at the mining companies, that was the map. I want to give you an example of how investors are looking, particularly from a more micro approach, the way investors are looking at the mining sector. And again, this is just an example of how one investor does it, but I think it will help to illustrate, again, the link to EITI. You see here, we have the same framework, so the big three themes, E, S, and G, environmental, social, and governance, are still there, but they are then driven down into the specifics of what that means for a particular sector, and in this case, mining. And here I'll just focus for a minute on one of those components. We have human capital management, environmental risk, corporate governance, but what I'm interested in here to illustrate, again, the link to EITI and governance is the question of license to operate. This is something which is, of course, very important for the companies that my investors invest in, is looking at the license to operate that a particular oil, gas, or mining company has. And what that means, we'll be looking at things like whether the company is exposed to high-risk regions, to regions or countries where there is social, political, economic instability. We'll be looking at questions of the relationships that the company has been able to develop with local communities, whether they have good relationships with those communities, where they're going to be drilling, where they're going to be mining. That always has impacts on the ground for communities, and it's important that companies manage those well. And then finally, I think it's very important that in terms of license to operate, and we've talked about licensing, about getting access to the natural resources themselves, it's important for the companies that we invest in to have developed those good relationships with government, but in an open and transparent way in order to have a legitimate access to those licenses and not ones through underhanded or under-the-table activities. I think what I want to do, and I think I might be getting close to time, but I still have a little bit of time. Thank you very much. Moving into, I think that some of this has already been said, but specifically about the EITI benefits for investors on this slide. I'll focus here on the point about investors. I think what EITI provides for investors is a robust and rigorous global standard which hopefully provides a level playing field for companies. And I think we've mentioned the points about competition, legitimate level playing field competition, again, not one that is driven through underhanded mechanisms. This is very important for investors. And this ultimately provides, I think, the basis or the foundation for a less risky operating environment for the companies that we invest in. When a country has achieved that level of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's the wrong word, but anyway, of sophistication in terms of having the right institutional framework, the right policy framework, and then even-handed development in terms of the political framework, the institutional framework, the economic diversification, and the social license to operate with its civil society, with NGOs, then that will provide an environment that investors will follow through and invest in. Just to conclude, I think I will just say a few words about the role of investors on the EITI board, and people often ask, well, what is it? What is, you're not investing, I'm not investing, my investor is not investing directly in Ukraine, they're not investing directly in Nigeria, etc. So why are you on the EITI board? Few quick words about that. I think it's important that precisely because we are not the direct investors, we're not investing on the ground. We have perhaps a bit of a distance view, a more a neutral view, an independent voice around the table on the board. We are investing through intermediaries, through the oil and gas companies, through the mining companies, and we don't have assets on the ground. So I think that helps provide for good governance on the EITI board, and that is the role that we seek to play there. And finally, I think just looking beyond, in order to conclude, beyond transparency, what investors are now looking for as one moves as EITI forges ahead. Again, I said at the beginning, I think transparency is a tool, it's a means, it's not an end in and of itself. The end in and of itself is better governance. And so what investors will be increasingly interested in is the impacts on the ground. How is this delivering results? And I think this is what the EITI standard that was approved a few years ago in Sydney in 2013, and this is something ultimately your country will have to demonstrate as well. And I just wanted to say in general, some of the things at the country level that we as investors will be looking at what EITI delivers or does not deliver here, but what we'd like to see is actual evidence or demonstration that revenue and payments transparency are having these positive effects. And that will mean that at the level of the country, reduced corruption and mismanagement, a strengthened legal, regulatory, and tax framework, increased foreign direct investment inflows to GDP, increased country debate on resource revenue contribution to government budgets and expenditure. And I just make the link with climate change briefly here, but I think investors that I represent will also be interested to see how the Ukraine, for example, manages or considers that transition to a sustainable economic development, perhaps at some point increasingly away from fossil fuels at some point down the road. And then finally, ultimately, better sovereign ratings through the financial markets. So that's at the country level. And for the companies operating here, what we ask them and what we will want to see is that EITI is giving them or helping them get better access to resources, giving them a better license to operate. And then finally, that they're less exposed to corruption risks. And with that, Thank you very much. Спасибо and дякую.
Thank you very much, David, and thanks for fleshing out the three critical aspects of sustainability. Sustainability is the key word for this forum, and thank you that you highlighted environmental, social, and governance aspects of sustainability. Thank you also for pointing out that transparency is just an element or the tool for achieving good governance, for improving governance. And we also appreciate you bringing to the table the vision and expectations of EITI. I think some of these aspects, most of them very well corresponded what World Bank Regional Director Chimiao Fen highlighted this morning, what Minister Dimchishin highlighted this morning, as well as Andy from American Chamber of Commerce representing a huge number of the private companies. So thank you very much for that. And with this, I would like to ask Mr. Maher Chebo to tell us what in your view is necessary in the current context of Ukraine and with its commitment towards EITI to establish the government system for EITI reporting, uniform system. Thank you.
I think a lot of things were said already. I will be going through the following presentation. First, what are the current energy challenges? Then I will be speaking about what we call an information energy hub. And then what's the solution for Ukraine, giving some examples of the best practices from the rest of the world, and what could be the next steps. So first is we have targets in Europe. These are 2020-2030 targets, and hopefully in the COP21 we will have also targets for the end of the century. So 2020 is the objectives for 2020, which is reducing carbon emissions, energy efficiency, and having the share of renewables. 2030 framework is targeting close to 40% reduction in carbon emissions and a ratio of about 30% of renewables and energy efficiency close to 30%. Now today we are speaking also about energy union. Why do we speak about energy union as well? Because energy is, per definition, a global sector, is a regional sector. There is a lot of things to share between the member states that are belonging to EU28, particularly interconnection between the countries, particularly the retail open market, the capacity to buy and sell energy anywhere in Europe. Now, energy independence is a key word. Every country would love to have their own production and their own consumption of energy, like food, like clothes, like manufacturing, like anything. Today, EU28 is importing 53% of its energy needs, and if it continues like that, it might increase. Our objective is to help the European member states, the European Union, to have as much as possible energy independence and to have the choice. Even if you are importing a lot of gas from outside, you should have the choice and the position to negotiate with different providers. If you don't have that choice, you are always under the dominance of somebody. So what is the energy strategic equation? 4 things, and some of them were already presented by David. First is the supply chain, is putting in place the process that can match the demand with the capacity of production and the supply and the storage. Second thing is a lot of oil and gas companies that would love to be called more energy providers than oil and gas companies because of the energy mix, is find out also a way that you focus as well on renewables. For example, Total has acquired 70% of sun power, and this is the number 3 in the world in solar technology. The portfolio management of energy and the policies. Third thing is the economics, making sure that we are doing things that are good for the citizen, good for the country, and good for the environment as well. And the investors can find out a good return, a good IRR out of their investments. This is needed. You cannot have anything deployed if the investors are not behind it. And the last thing is, yes, there have been a huge progress in technology. 10 years ago, we didn't have that speed of telecoms. We didn't have 3G, 4G, and 5G. Now, we didn't have also technologies where you can deal with billions of records of data, big data, what we call also Internet of Things. And more, we have also standards in terms of prediction and predictive analytics. Now, what are the challenges in the oil and gas industry? A lot of oil and gas companies are suffering. They are suffering because of historical low oil prices, and this will continue for a couple of years minimum. Geopolitics, intervention, unfortunately, none of the models or the software can do anything if they are geopolitics, but we can prevent it by predicting different scenarios. Environment, health and safety, quality of management, security, cybersecurity is a must today. DG Energy, the European Commission, has put in place an initiative on cybersecurity, and a lot will be done. Standard best practices, transparency, operational integrity, risk management, how to collect plenty of data and be able then to manage the risk and manage the what-if scenarios. And then the collaboration. In energy, you have a lot of partners who work together. The ones who operate Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, the ones who is building it, the ones who is exploiting it, and so on. This is what we call the business networks. So while you are building infrastructure, you have to connect all the ones who are doing the projects together, project networks. And also for the assets, you have to have asset networks between the ones who manufacture the equipment for the pipeline and the ones who install the pipeline and the ones who operate them. And the overall anticipation of the management of the hydrocarbon supply chain. But the most important thing is the last 2 points. Taking the right decisions at any event happening in terms of decision support. Can we prevent a crisis? Or when the crisis happens, for example, and somebody takes a negative decision against you, that you are in a position to react and to react in real time. And the last thing is effectively contributing to the European energy independence is also having a decision support system to say, how can I produce the maximum and, if possible, the maximum from the resources that I have, and then import the minimum. Now, ensuring reliability of industry information to support transparency. What are for Ukraine the motivating factors? Internal requirements for transparency, Mr. Minister and David also, and the other speaker as well from the Chamber of Commerce spoke about it. Integration into the European energy system, requirements for more reporting, data exchange. There are directives from the European Union, and we have to comply with that. Compliance with the international initiatives like the transparency of EITI, we just got a presentation about it, and also be part of the future energy market reform, whether it's in Ukraine or also future energy market in Europe, and I spoke about it with the Energy Union at the beginning. There is a need also to attract investments in industry. I hear that in Greece, I hear that in Turkey, I hear that in Africa, I hear that in many countries as well. They are asking us, how can we put in place things that could attract investors? Kazakhstan today, the government will be selling some of the businesses there, but they are investing now to show that these companies have transparency and reliability and the right systems before they sell it, because they can sell it at a much higher price. Same in RAW UES 10 years ago, when they also sold it in small pieces to foreign energy buyers or local buyers. They also acquired a lot of technology to show transparency at RAW UES before they sell it. The current situation is the lack of actual integrated information, complexity to get the information. That's also a pain for many other countries. I can assure you it's not only a pain for Ukraine. And also there is a complex regulatory reporting, and this is also a pain for a lot of other countries. Italy produces almost a new law every day, okay? So we have to comply with that, and technology should manage the regulatory life cycle. So where do we start? The changes of law, and also the impact of the law on the consumers at the end. So there is a difficulties in making information management decisions, and what we suggest is to have a single point of the truth, which means we can speak about the same number the same way, so not have somebody saying, no, your number is not correct, my number is correct. It's the same source of the truth, and this is for all the information consumers, whether we are speaking about internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. And type of information that was mentioned, data for actual production, extraction, the whole value chain in upstream, midstream, and downstream in oil and gas, data also from the utility sector, electricity, gas, renewables, water, heat, and mineral mining, and so on. And all the forecasts that are related to this data, the possibility to plan also and to compare the planned values with the actual values, and to have a list of key performance indicators. So the set of this data for evaluating the investment attractiveness of various projects, this is what will attract a lot of investors. Type of reporting could be different nature, regulatory, information, etc. My advice is not to work on producing data for the sake of producing data. If I compare it with water, you could have a lot of water, but the usage of water could be different. You could use water for drinking, water for washing, water for hydro power generation. So the data also think about the use of that before you think about producing big volumes. So what's the solution for Ukraine? We did design actually a solution where you can take all the real-time and non-real-time systems. Real-time systems are the systems that do the supervision and control, and they have the latest up-to-date data. We bring that data up, we aggregate it, we put it in a central industrial information hub, and that hub is publishing that information the same way, the same source of truth to all internal and external stakeholders who need it. We are speaking here about our non-mission critical data, which means reporting, analysis. You can make benchmarking, and you can make also prediction and forecasting. So how we would do that? We have developed a benchmarking database center at SAP. This value management center comprises hundreds of key performance indicators that we have collected from about 1,000 oil and gas companies and about 3,000 utilities companies and so on. For the whole energy sector, about 10,000 companies. And these KPIs include everything, whether it's in finance, in manufacturing, in supply chain management, in oil and gas, industry specific, in the procurement, in the supply chain, and also some KPIs about technology. So we can get the picture very quickly by comparing with that value management center the KPIs we have from the rest of the market with the KPIs of a specific market like Ukraine. So what we did, for example, for the oil and gas crisis, we studied the market after the crisis happened 6 months later. We did put a team, and the team did take the KPIs in our value management center, and we studied why some oil and gas companies are in a good shape to get out of the crisis and others are not. So we did compare the KPIs one by one, and to show, look here, maybe in the downstream you can improve your margin. Here in the upstream you have maybe to explore more your fields, and there are some technologies that can explore and extend maybe the life cycle of a field that you can produce more at a lower price, like $20. If the price of the barrel is $40, you can produce maybe at $20. And then these are the example of KPIs you see here, of improvement, of budget, of decrease of inventory, of decrease of the cost of the project, and so on. So we did also think that the transparency that we are talking about today to improve the attractiveness of the investors could go to the next level. And the next level is to develop a cockpit like the airplanes would have. An airplane has all the data that is collected from aerodynamism, from speed, from the whole history of the plane, that can help the plane to navigate properly, going up, horizontal, going down at the right moment, without even too much intervention from the pilot. Still an intervention, but the system is providing a lot of information to that. So having a cockpit of energy for Ukraine, this is feasible. So these are all the data that we could collect, plus import and export, and the system can help taking the decision. Now, examples. The Association of Power Utilities in Africa has asked us to provide visibility, transparency, traceability exactly for the same thing, to attract investors. The Association of Power Utilities is 53 countries in Africa. And this is for benchmarking data for every member of APUA and also to attract investors. Some data is collected from what we call on the ground IT, OT, information technology, operational technology, going up to decision support and going up to executive decisions. We have created also the KPIs that can give information about the policies, document all the requirements, and also develop energy patterns. We have also created some KPIs that can do some benchmarks. This is what I was talking about. And these benchmarks are about environment, health, and safety. That gives you the lost time of incidents, the reportable incidents, the electrical incident, customers, etc. And compare that year on year. We have also some examples that can provide the kind of board cockpit about what is the status, what are the funds being invested, what projects are approved, and what are the projects by value, and the projects, where are they in terms of time frame according to the planning. This is the cockpit about the project. We have also developed other KPIs here, and then we have done that also for the city of Kiev, to finance and budgeting. To finish, what are the next steps? There is a lot of work that has been done, and actually today I have seen a report which is a very interesting one, which has been distributed from Dixie Group and other participants. I think this is all is helpful to what we want to achieve. We have used either from my group at the European Commission, we work with who work on smart energy and who work on smart grids and oil and gas, or also our experts from SAP. They have been working on this. One of them is in the room today, Fritz Schwarz-Lander. The next steps could be to create a cross-industry group, which is a group of stakeholders that come all together to achieve the targets of Ukraine. And their own objective is to achieve the targets of Ukraine in the best way. Vision, innovation, operational projects. And this should represent the whole market. Define the types of internal and external stakeholders. I mentioned the list of these stakeholders at the beginning. And then we have just to finalize that list. Who could be the users, the stakeholders who will be using this information? The types and forms of information provided. We have presented a few of them. As I said, we have done a pre-study to list what could be the information provided, but we can fine-tune it and define the types of data sources, order processing and verification, from where we will collect the data. There could be as well external data from external databases we can also put together, and then define the types of presentation and analysis and how the information should be presented. We have developed recently in our company something called Boardroom of the Future, which means you don't use paper, you don't use PowerPoint anymore. You come, whether you are speaking about the government and ministers or a board of a company, and you see 3, 4, 5 screens, and on every screen you have the information, and you see the information up to date, transparent, one source of the truth. If you are not happy with the number, or you have questions on the number, you just drill down immediately in real time, and you get access to the details of that information as it is at the moment when you speak about it. And this is called Boardroom of the Future, completely digital. Okay, and this is what we suggest to develop for Ukraine. So we are very keen to continue the journey, to work with the other speakers here and the other stakeholders and Mr. Minister to provide the best-in-class energy cockpit for Ukraine that could attract investors and improve the situation as well in the country. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Maher, for bringing to the panel European Commission vision, and we very much appreciated your presentation and sharing with us regarding the very powerful database, benchmarking database. Certainly, benchmarking and key performance indicators could become a very powerful tool for pushing towards improvements at the international level. You also highlighted the how difficult is to have a reliable data, not just a data, but to ensure that this is reliable data and to have a full compliance with requirements of data reliability. And with this, I would like again to highlight that Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Finance, and EITI multi-stakeholder group have done a great job in pulling information together from over 100 of companies, and I think this brings us all together today. We are missing one of the participants of our panel, Mr. Mark Rollins, and therefore we have quite a time for questions and answers. So I'm welcoming questions from the audience. So, ladies and gentlemen, no questions to participants? Let me perhaps start with the first question to Mr. Minister. Mr. Minister, now that Ukraine has produced its first EITI report, do you think there is a government's role to perhaps have a more systematized reporting requirement?
Well, as I already mentioned in the beginning, information provides advantage to for taking right decisions. So we clearly understand the necessity of it. And as Mr. Chebo said, the instruments are there. Europe and globally, information is used. In Ukraine, you see, information was not available because in dirty water you can catch the fish. So there were many people interested in having no real quality data. That's very important. On the other side, you see, we have started this initiative. Information collected in the report is covering only 2013. So it is a little bit. It is there, it is important, it is useful, but not that useful for taking decisions today. So I agree that information should be collected in real-time mode. And also we should cover more industries. This report covers only oil and gas, but we have coal, which is very much important for me, because we have one very strong player or monopolist on the market that is representing 80-85% of the industry, and unfortunately no one, not the regulator nor the ministry, knows the cost structure of their operations of each particular mine, for example. And knowing it, we would be able to probably get better decisions on the tariffs, on coal, on price of the coal, on stimulating the industry itself, so that we are not that much dependent on supplies, for example, from South Africa as today. So this is a special case, but like I said, everything is tied, interconnected, and therefore, in the future, we need to have more real time, more covering, more specific, because this time, as you will see, a lot of many companies have provided information, but many have not. So some people were rejecting, not responding, and etc. So we need regulatory changes so that companies are, I would say, obliged. Focusing on financial reports of each particular company that we are for example, last year was making this. Yes, it depends on tariff. They are on this. If they collect money, they have possibility to invest to profitability. But they are very important. For example, not yet here, but I'm sure they started paying taxes. They figures reported are correct. Earned and there's no clear understanding about the after dividends. They increase tariffs for data is very this year. You see, because in imports substituted by internal production, the flow of instead of VAT or instead of structural, but doesn't say that budget will shrink so that you are not meant to accept tariffs. Not wrong, but was having excess or everybody, in some cases you are paying even low project losses, and there are actual losses. So in order to prove that actual losses are, and they need to be covered, so like I said, data-oriented or therefore are number crunchers, but these number crunching philosophy of the country itself, as many our consumption, internal production, or of diversified imports, and in case simple unbundling and on to their basic, and this is important. And I see this on and we have the ministers on providing a result, and in the to write the decision. I also recognize that involved result. If NAFTA taking will be a supervisory board of professionals. The company will, on one side be pressed by from the market, on the other side having people in the board taking positions and supported by this is the so data. Thank you.
I think what you were talking about the change, definitely that one part of the mill and mining, chemicals, oil and gas, all part of the chain. I'm responsible for energy, and this is the overall value chain, because we believe we can provide advices and advice when we. So when we speak with Shell or Total or Aramco or Repsol, these companies these businesses represent. Is when but for the answer, you need to find out the end-to-end cost producing or the cost oil end-to-end. we were collecting all the information and reporting. Is many simulations and being capable with a scenario, and then the system can give you a different. And this, I think, I don't know if you get in the presentation, is to get everything collected in the system and simulated to say, if I change a factor, what the effect of changing that factor?
I welcome questions from all.
Yes. Good morning, I'm Marinke van Wieten. I'm the International Director of our panelist. What's supposed to probably be very days. It's really a shame that the minister didn't ask him a question. The role of civil society and foreign sector, because we heard a lot of governments, the role of parliament, the role of, but less actually contributes really if civil society can contribute.
Some light, more transparency, more things. I think in Ukraine, society has been it's been massive. In terms of the civil society, the free press, opening up. So the links with it is a matter now. The trust is growing. I think into the post revolution, this role more. I mean, on Saturday, the volunteers have done. I think the role of civil society has changed, and it's playing in terms of investment role play.
Thanks, Enrique, for the excellent question. The role of civil society in very much detail, but I think for investors in making good investments, in order to do so, increasingly civil society is important. Way this plays out, I'll speak about it in terms of course, you could do that much better later. But it means waivers accessing when corporates and the representatives from companies is they want sources of information. Don't want to just have the word from one horses, the CEO or that company, and all part of the companies my investors invest in are CSO. They provide an important of power. That investors are looking at that are published by NGOs that are in mental space, in labor rights. So I think it's worth underscoring and worth stressing, and I think that the role that CSO plays in part of what we call the fact that it is a multiple. We have big constituencies. We have governments, companies, and that is can be a huge driver for change. It's different from the EITI board meetings that, to be honest, I've never. They say it's the first time. It is the first time the government is being the companies are within. So I think that's important.
Thank you for this. Literal question. Thank you.
Dibadoglu, civil society, regional region, AI board. The insightful conversation. Unfortunately, Mr. left us, but made some progress for the despite of the sometimes have been used to justify transformation and reform. You and war in the implementation of EIT. The government sometimes the war transition to the reform to the democratization. Big impact in this transition process in the the war with from the Russia.
Or reforms or process term or for example. So of the I think said, but I can speak on the other side that energy pain points and sense of to accelerate the progress, the need for best to attract new projects in energy. That is about the war. We go to countries where there is war. We go to countries, and both of them, when it comes to the energy sector, the good reason for preparing for the future. And for example, we are doing all of the what are the pain points and what is the months or years doing something.
Thank you very much. In the East has very much economy and developments as a GDP. However, we see increasingly officials even higher reforms because the current context refresh on the timing of reforms. And our time is over, so let me Vladimir Dimchishin, Maher Tebo, Dave Diamond, and Andy. And let's give our panel applause. Thank you.